First Steps into the Night, written by Tao Wong, narrated by Stephanie Nemeth Parker. An oval metallic bright red helmet that looked like a bastard cross between science fiction and a motorcycle helmet held the attention of the leggy brunette as it lay on her bed. Kylie Porter bit her lip as she stared at the Novacore virtual reality helmet, forcing herself to draw and exhale a deep breath to calm her nerves. This is your first assignment. Brent, that rat bastard, won't buy the piece if you don't write it. You can't write it if you don't go in. Come on, Kylie. All the studies say it's fine. There's no danger. The brunette whispered to herself in a surprisingly low, husky voice in an effort to psych herself up. The truth was, for Kylie, it was not about the danger to her mind or body that the VR helmet exemplified, but what came afterward. You know Johnathan won't wait long for you. If he doesn't show you around, you don't have a chance at writing this. As she chewed on her lower lip, Kylie looked out of the 11th floor window of her apartment. The downtown skyline of Vancouver still glowed with reflected electric light, even years after the night sky legislation had passed. Beneath her, she could hear the low rumble of electric buses and grid-connected shared vehicles carrying the residents to the latest party. A part of Kylie desperately wanted to be out there, in the press of humanity, rather than in here, staring at the helmet. Then again, she barely had enough money to make it through the month. Existing on the minimum basic income was tough, especially for a single woman without roommates. Kylie sighed and turned away from the window and back to the helmet. She finally forced herself to pick it up, and she slid it over her long, silky hair. As she adjusted the straps, Kylie lay down on the bed before she touched the side of the helmet, engaging the program. A brief moment of disorientation later, and light blossomed around her eyes before it faded away, gray and red titles floating into her vision. Welcome to Eternal Night. Eternity awaits all. Kylie found herself in a cream-colored foyer with no furniture, only a single pedestal. As she walked up to it, she marveled at how real everything felt. The soft caress of the silk dress around her thighs, the clack of her high heels on the marble floor, and the floral notes that tickled her nostrils. It took her a brief moment to realize that it was a touch too realistic, as her small breasts shifted unsupported under her dress. The lack of underclothing an unpleasant surprise. A further, more pleasant surprise appeared in the form of her greeter, Bill Lowry, the debonair and charming silver-haired Englishman who had appeared by the pedestal. Ms. Sugard, Bill said in that deep, rolling voice of his that had made him a favorite celebrity for decades. Welcome to Eternal Night. I will be your guide during the character creation process. From the details of your account, this is your first virtual realm game? Yes, Kylie said. She found herself slightly breathless as she stared up at the older man. She was not too modest to admit that she had a crush on the celebrity, and finding herself in his presence, even a recorded virtual presence, was closer than she had ever expected to get. Very well, then. He smiled at her and waved to the pedestal. If you will put your hand on the pedestal, we need to finish the legal agreements first, after which I will explain the character creation process and guide you through the tutorial. Oh, but I have a friend who is showing me around, Kylie blurted out, her eyes growing wide. How long will this take? A few hours at most, Miss Sugard, Bill rumbled. However, if you wish, we can skip the tutorial aspects for now. You may return to the tutorial at any time while in a safe location. We will still, however, have to complete the legal agreement and character creation. Of course. Relieved, Kylie smiled and placed her hand on the pedestal. In front of her, a long document listing the terms and conditions of the game appeared. Do you wish me to read them to you? Bill offered, and for a moment, Kylie almost agreed. The journalist in her wondered how many women actually did agree. Certainly if anyone could make dry legal text sound exciting, it would be Bill Lowry. No, just let me know how to agree. Kylie replied. As Bill led her through the necessary steps, she settled in to complete the character creation process as quickly as possible. As it stood, she had dithered long enough already. She was afraid she would be late for her appointment.
Took you long enough.
The wry, sarcastic tone made Kylie jerk slightly as she walked out of the train station. The admiring glance that came a moment later was, at least, more the effect she had hoped for. Character creation had taken longer than she had expected, mostly because she had found herself getting caught up in the avatar creation process. While cyber eunuchs had, at the recommendations of a number of psychologists, restricted the character creation process to similar models to the user's own body, for the most part, it did allow minor modification. It was, in many ways, very similar to the programs that plastic surgeons used, allowing individuals to create a more perfect image of themselves. As such, Kylie had altered certain aspects of her body that she had never liked. Her lips were now plumper, her hair a touch longer, ears smaller, and she now had a chin that was slightly less pointy. She had even added a cup size, though she had decided against the truly voluptuous proportions that were available. All in all, she had to think that she looked good, and the lingering, heated look that Johnathan was offering her was testament to that. "Johnathan," Kylie replied, smirking slightly that he never bothered to change his first name. On the other hand, Johnathan had certainly filled out since she had last seen him half a decade ago. Towering over her at 6'3", black hair and a buzz cut with those deep, dark black eyes of his, Jonathan's avatar had the broad shoulders and tapered waist of a gymnast. "You're looking good."
"Thanks. We should get going,"
Johnathan replied, leading the young lady to a waiting car. He opened the door for her, letting her slide into the back seat before he joined her. A single barked word of "home" had the driver taking off.
"I take it you followed my recommendations?"
"Yes, all of them, though I'm not sure why you were so specific," Kylie admitted, and Johnathan smiled, that twinkle in his eyes making her think of winter evenings spent over cups of mulled wine, huddled under fur blankets. She blinked, her mouth open in surprise as a memory that was not hers crept into her mind.
"First injected memory?"
Johnathan asked, and she nodded numbly. Of course, Kylie had read about how cyber eunuchs had created, and some said perfected, the development of artificial memories, but she had always thought it would somehow feel alien to her. This had been much more intuitive, almost as if it had been her own memory. If not for the fact that everything had been in black and white, she would have found it quite difficult to tell the difference. "It seems so real," Kylie said out loud.
"It's not really a real memory. It just feels like it. It's more akin to a thought that is slightly fuzzy, which is why it seems so close to a real memory. It's still strange,"
Johnathan answered her, smiling slightly before he gestured sideways.
"Either way, you'll get used to it."
Kylie nodded again, staring out the window before she asked the obvious question. "Where are we going? I thought you said you were going to show me the game."
"To feed. Starting characters start with about a quarter of their blood pool, so you have to feed tonight or else you'll fall into a blood frenzy,"
Johnathan said, lips turning up slightly. "Oh." Kylie fell silent as she contemplated how she would handle drinking blood. Even if it was a game, the entire concept made her a little bit queasy. Her thoughts were interrupted as the car pulled to a stop, marking their arrival in the underground garage. Johnathan offered his hand as he stepped out of the car, guiding Kylie to the elevator and his penthouse apartment. Johnathan opened the door and gestured for Kylie to enter before him. As Kylie strode into the modern, sparsely furnished apartment, she was greeted by a petite Japanese lady with what must have been game-augmented breasts, wearing an extremely tight, strapless gown. "Welcome back, master." The Japanese woman bowed slightly to Johnathan as he entered before she turned to the newcomer. "Welcome. I am Hana Takizawa." Karen Lane," Kylie answered before turning to give Johnathan a reproving look. "Really? A Japanese maid calling you master?" "I am sorry, Ms. Lane,"
But I am not an NPC, Hannah said quickly before Johnathan could reply. She smiled sweetly at Kylie Karen as she bowed to her again. I am a player character, and I call Johnathan Master, as that is his title. He is my bloodlord. I'd also stop breaking roleplay so blatantly, Johnathan drawled, his lip twisted up on one side. It is considered bad form, especially among those we will be visiting. Kylie nodded, taking the rebuke in stride. She stared at Hannah, who waved them farther into the condo, leading them past the granite countertop kitchen to the living room where a pair of black couches looked out over the city view. Towering high-rises and condo apartments were abound, though few were as tall as the building they currently resided in. Outside, street lamps and office buildings glittered in the dark, telling their tale of lives lived. In the far distance to the left, mountains glittered, while to the right, the Atlantic Ocean lay. As Kylie took in the spectacular view, a hand was placed in the small of her back. When she turned to confront the invader, she found herself staring at Hannah, who smiled up at her demurely. They were so close that Kylie could not help but notice Hannah's smell, the slight floral note of her perfume, and beneath that, the clean, intoxicating smell of her skin. Kylie found herself reacting to Hannah's presence, leaning forward to draw a deeper breath. That bastard, Kylie thought. He knows I have a thing for Asian women. Kylie began. My master informed me of your needs. Please, let me. Hannah murmured as she tilted her head to the side and brushed her long hair clear of her neck. You need only let your instincts guide you. Kylie blinked, staring at the long, supple line of flesh before her and the thud of the blood beneath Hannah's skin. She could, she swore, almost see it, taste it. Without thought, Kylie's fangs extended from her mouth as she bent down, a hand coming up to grasp the young lady by the back of her head, while her other hand grasped Hannah's behind, pulling her tight. Kylie breathed in the intoxicating scent that surrounded her now, which made her nipples harden and her body wet. Unable to resist any further, Kylie plunged her head down onto Hannah's bared neck. As her fangs pierced Hannah's skin, she felt the rush of blood enter her mouth. The blood tasted like hot chocolate, tinged with salty iron. It tasted so good that Kylie moaned slightly in ecstasy, clutching the Japanese woman to her body and melding it to her. Beneath her lips, Hannah groaned in pleasure, fists clenched as she was taken. Blood pulsed in her mouth, sending waves of warmth down Kylie's body with each mouthful she drank. It set her flesh burning, her nerves tingling with sensation as she drew it all in, her body involuntarily clenching and releasing as she sucked. She was caught for minutes, maybe hours, before insistent tapping on her shoulder finally drew her away from Hannah. Enough, Karen, Johnathan said, as he pulled her away from the petite young lady before catching her with one arm, setting her on a nearby couch to rest. Is she okay? Kylie said as she wiped her mouth clean. She was surprised at how little blood there was to clean, but then again, why should she be? After all, this was a game, and no one really wanted to spend their game time cleaning up messy blood spillages. She will be fine. You took a little too much, but Hannah will recover in a few days, Johnathan replied, smiling down at the young Japanese girl fondly. We can leave her here. You need to get changed. Oh, Kylie nodded and then stopped. Changed? Huh. Johnathan pointed, and to the side, hung up on the nearby mantel, was a long, shimmering gown, very similar to the one that she first started the game with in the training area. Best hurry. We don't want to be late. Dressed and her hair redone, Kylie found herself sharing the elevator down with Johnathan. Able to speak now, she asked the questions that had built up in her. You said a few days. How does that work? How much blood did I drink? Hannah's a blood baby. Their skills include faster regeneration, blood scent, taste additions, and related abilities. Johnathan said, most players who have a blood baby character have more than one, since a bad feeding can knock your character out for a few days.
Oh, Kylie bit her lip.
Ask it, Johnathan said.
Ask what?
Whatever it is you're thinking about,
Johnathan replied as he stepped out of the elevator.
Why? I mean, why do people play blood babies?
Kylie blurted out as she followed Johnathan to the waiting car.
Depends. However, what you felt while feeding? Blood babies feel it twice, 3 times as intensely. I'm told it's better than sex for many,
Johnathan said.
Some people like playing someone subservient. Others do it for the pleasure. And then, of course, there are those who play the long game.
Long game? Kylie asked.
If you can convince an Eternal with a high blood potency to turn you in-game, you can skip the character creation process and give yourself a significant leg up in terms of power. You get to keep all the skills and abilities you built up after all,
Johnathan said. Oh, Kylie nodded in thanks. So, this party.
Ball. It's a ball, Johnathan corrected. The leader of the 𝗲𝗏𝗵𝗵, Caroline, hosts a monthly ball. Everyone who is anyone in Eternal Society shows up. If you want to see what the game is like, there is no better place tonight.
A ball, Kylie said, her voice utterly deadpan.
Yes. Now, be good and remember role play,
Johnathan replied, opening the door as they pulled up. As Kylie exited the vehicle, she stared up at the large colonial mansion with its white marble columns and uniformed servants. All around her, primped and pampered individuals walked up the stairs. Most were pale, only a few lightly tanned. She had to smile slightly, remembering that Eternals in the game were able to interact even during the day, allowing players to log in at all hours to continue playing. Of course, since it was a game that focused on the Eternals, the night portions of the game were significantly longer than the day portions. In accordance with the theme, Eternals had significant penalties in the light of the sun, which gave the AI-controlled hunters a chance. A slight elbow in her side made Kylie remember to focus again on the present, as John led her up the stairs. He paused only long enough to nod in greeting to the majordomo at the doors before he led her in, without proffering the invitations many others did. Kylie was not oblivious to the jealous looks that they received for his casual display of status and power from the surrounding Eternals. Eyes wide, she leaned in slightly to whisper,
"There are a lot of Eternals here, John." "A decent attendance,"
John said as he let his eyes wander over the gathering.
"It is the monthly ball."
Kylie marveled at the decor as John led her into the building. Beautiful white, impeccably polished marble floors were flanked by solid, single-tree wooden doors on each side. An impressively large pair of double doors were directly ahead of her, which opened into the main ballroom itself, though John led her to the right, past those doors and along the corridor to ascend a set of staircases. On the second floor, she was brought to the balcony that oversaw the ballroom to allow her to watch the dancers below. All across the floor, dancers clad in designer ball gowns and tuxedos moved under fully lit chandeliers, while waiters and waitresses walked between them, carrying hors d'oeuvres and glasses of red wine. Other servers with a blue or white armband walked among the throng carrying nothing, while servers clad with a gold armband were found only on this floor. As she watched, Kylie noticed that these servers would occasionally be gently taken to carefully arranged side tables and sheltered nooks where Eternals would feed on them.
"What are the colors for, John?"
Kylie murmured. There were not enough colors to indicate blood type among the throng, though she noticed that there were a larger number of white scarves than there were of the other two. John stayed silent until a passing server walked by. When she did, John reached out to gently tap the petite blonde on the shoulder, wherein the server stopped immediately, turning to the pair with a smile.
"Please turn and show Miss Lane your sigil."
Obeying his instructions, the server turned to the left and showcased her white armband as she stepped closer to Kylie. On it was a carefully embroidered sigil of a lion flanked by 2 griffins. Unconsciously, Kylie found herself inhaling the scent of the young lady, her expanded senses drinking in the appetizing scent of the woman. His eyes crinkling slightly, John dismissed the server before he spoke to Kylie.
Each color represents a different sponsor for this evening's festivities.
A slightly raised hand beckoned a tall, olive-complexioned server with a gold armband to them. Even before he closed in on the pair, Kylie could smell the intoxicating scent of the man. She found herself arching her back unconsciously before she swept her hair back from her face. However, before she could reach the man, John stepped in the way and placed a hand on his chest. Kylie hissed in frustration, and her fangs lowered slightly from her lips as she struggled for self-control. As John stood before the man, he craned his neck down as he gently raised the man's chin. He nuzzled the neck before nipping at the exposed skin, taking the slightest sip before he licked the wound clean, sealing it again. The scent of the man's exposed blood almost sent Kylie into a tizzy before she caught herself and pushed her back against the railing. As she forced herself to breathe deeply, Kylie wondered what was happening to her.
And that's why I had you feed before you came.
John answered her unspoken question. He watched the young man amble away before he smiled slightly.
𝗓𝗄 tastes better than them anyway.
What? She shook her head and tried again. Why do they smell so good?
Alluring scent. It's a blood perk that blood babies get,
John said, keeping his voice soft as he spoke.
He has a few levels in it, as does 𝗓𝗄. However, she has better levels in blood palate.
Nodding dumbly, Kylie took a deep breath and focused on her job, analyzing the room. After a moment, she said,
Each of the blood babies is sponsored. I'm assuming a large number, if not all, are AIs, and the white went for quantity while gold went with quality.
At her pronouncement, a soft clapping sound caught Kylie's attention. She turned, spotting an elegant blonde with gray eyes and flowing, naturally blonde hair walked up to her in a cross-strapped gown with a daring cutout.
Well done. This is your friend, John? Charlotte?
John walked over to the approaching lady and took her hand, kissing it gently.
And yes, excuse her lack of decorum. She's new at this. Karen, Charlotte Renard here is your bloodline's elder in this city.
I'll always excuse someone so beautiful, Charlotte said gaily before she sauntered over to lean against the railing next to Kylie. As she rested her arms on the railing, Kylie could not help but notice the gold bracer that she wore had the same sigil engraved on it as the ones on the gold armbands.
And I believe it better befits a host to provide higher quality nourishment.
You would say that, and you would leave everyone hungry. Another voice called forth as another blonde, this one less voluptuous and taller, came striding over to the pair. If Charlotte was Marilyn Monroe, this lady was a supermodel, her frame thin with perfect poise. Dressed in a beautiful, form-fitting white gown with the embroidered crest accenting the entire dress. Will you introduce us, John?
Of course,
John said as he gestured to Kylie.
Karen Lane of the 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, Anna Johnson of the 𝐶𝑠ars.
Kylie blinked, confused for a moment, before she decided to curtsy to each lady. Thinking fast, she first curtsied to Charlotte and then Anna. A slight smile crossed Charlotte's face, while Anna's eyes grew slightly colder. However, Kylie was relieved to note the slight nod that John gave her for her actions. This seemed like murky and dangerous waters she suddenly found herself in.
Those who are unable to fend for themselves should not be coddled,
Charlotte sighed, arching her back slightly and displaying her charms as she continued.
Your generosity only ensures that the rabble keep relying on us.
Better they rely on us and come to these events than cause trouble outside, said Anna. We are better off with the fingers content with the balls and games we create than them creating their own.
And, of course, the fact that they support your little proposals has nothing to do with your actions,
Charlotte said. I don't proclaim charity, Anna snapped. I leave that for the 𝗓𝒊𝒏𝒆. What I do for the good of the city, which is more than can be said for you.
The city is better off with fewer fingers and more bloods, Charlotte said. Kylie watched the byplay between the two, confused. She shot John a look and he smiled slightly, glancing at the ladies. If you ladies do not mind, perhaps I can explain the matter to my friend. Please, maybe your explanation can clear up some confusion others have too, Charlotte said, her voice dripping scorn. Anna snorted but waved John to continue. He nodded agreeably, stepping up to the railing and gesturing down to the throng below who danced. You have to understand, Eternal Night is played by a wide variety of people, like any other game. Players all have their own reasons, of course, but they can be broken down into 3 main types. The casuals, the fingers that you see below. They join us every few days and enjoy the fantasy of being rich, powerful, and beautiful. Then there are the bloods, like Anna and Charlotte, who are much more serious. Bloods hold most of the day-to-day power in the city, and they are the ones who organize many of the balls, the games, and the hunts that keep the fingers entertained. The argument, as you can then guess, is how much bloods should cater to fingers. Johnathan paused slightly before he finally continued. Also, fingers is considered impolite. Most prefer the term Eternals. Oh, Kylie said, glancing between the group. Her brow scrunched as she thought. But why hold these events at all? What do bloods get out of it? Power, prestige, influence, Anna answered immediately. Your character probably has significant financial resources at her behest. At these events, you can gain more by interacting with other Eternals. By hosting these events, we bring Eternals together, which allows us to draw power and prestige to ourselves. Caroline sighed, shaking her head. Expect a Caesar to always think about the masses. Better to focus on those that matter. And on that note, I do have work to do. Another time, Johnathan. Ms. Lane, I hope you will continue to play. If you do, make sure to visit me. Anna. Of course, Caroline. Johnathan inclined his head slightly to Caroline, who turned and strode off. Once she had left, Anna turned to focus on Kylie fully. So, Miss Lane, Johnathan mentioned to us that he would be showing an old friend of his off. Did he, perhaps, introduce you around yet? No, we just arrived. And please, call me Karen, Kylie said, introducing herself, and Anna nodded. Anna, then, Anna smiled. If that is the case, I'll let him continue. Do come speak with me again. When Anna left, Kylie leaned in to whisper to Johnathan, careful to keep her voice low. That was intense. It reminded me of high school. I wouldn't know, John replied, smiling slightly. Kylie recalled then that, unlike her, Johnathan had never been part of the cool kids. He had rather mixed with the outcasts. It was only Johnathan's well-known record in the school's karate tournaments that had ensured that he was never bothered. Right. Kylie fell silent, glancing around. So, is it always like that? Sort of. Taking her hand, Johnathan led her along the floor, nodding to people while never stopping to speak. Eternal Night for the Blood is a game of prestige and influence. If you can get enough people to agree with you, deal with you, then you can win. The skills, the stats, those are all ancillary to the real game of politics. Of course, the stats help since Novacore's tech makes it easier for those with high stats to convince you in-game. Now, watch the pair of men on your left. They're 𝗙𝗂𝗄 and 𝗂𝗄𝗄, and they are putting together a deal to safeguard the 𝗙𝗂𝗄's latest project. The Caesar hovering in the corner is the financier for it all. In this way, he murmured softly to Kylie as they walked around the room, John pointing out the games of influence and politics being played. A business deal here, promises of protection there, a guarantee of attendance another place. The deals were all varied. The promises seemed to be both tangible and esoteric. A vial of blood, a pair of enchanted swords, millions of dollars.
After a time, Kylie caught Johnathan's arm and pulled him to a stop and over to a nearby column where she spoke with him. "It's so complicated. It's like another world."
"It very much is," Johnathan replied, smiling slightly. "Novacore's created a very complex economic and city-building game, which allows us to trade and negotiate for anything you can think of. The politics and intrigue in the game among the Bloods comes from that."
Kylie slowly nodded. "Something has been bothering me. You said there are 3 kinds, but never mentioned the 3rd.
"Ah, the 3rd kind of player are the lifers," Johnathan replied. Well, they're like the Bloods in that they take the game seriously, but mostly because they make their money off the game. There's mixed feelings about them."
"Oh, right," Kylie nodded, smiling slightly. Novacore's exchange was well known and was linked to all their games. It allowed players to purchase Novacore dollars, which they could then use to purchase additional resources in any of Novacore's games or their subsidiary services. To allow players to test and play in all their games, Novacore had an internal exchange, which allowed players to trade in-game resources for Novacore dollars. However, many players soon realized that it was quite possible to use their Novacore dollars to pay for regular day-to-day services, as Novacore's subsidiaries and affiliates spanned the globe, giving birth to lifers.
"Do you want to dance?"
John asked as they completed the circuit around the 2nd floor. He could already see that Kylie had been making mental notes of the taste he had given her of the politics of the Blood. "Dance?"
"Yes, down there."
He inclined his head to the ballroom below. "Oh, I'm a bit out of practice," Kylie admitted. It had been ages since she had danced, and certainly even longer since she had done ballroom. Why, it would be nearly—
"Well, you do owe me a dance from prom,"
Johnathan pointed out as he gently guided her down the stairs. Kylie blushed, remembering how she had promised him that dance for his last-minute help with her science paper. Johnathan never did collect on it, though, having never turned up to prom. "Whatever happened to you?" Kylie murmured as Johnathan smoothly joined the spinning couples, pulling her along. Kylie found herself automatically following his strong lead, her body, assisted by the software, finding the rhythm with ease.
"Ah."
Johnathan fell silent, his eyes darkening. Kylie opened her mouth to take the question back, but she was surprised to find him answer her.
"My dad received a last-minute transfer. We had to be packed and gone in a week."
"Oh," Kylie said, smiling slightly. "Well, you're a much better dancer than my date was, then."
"Perks of the system,"
Johnathan replied, before he spun Kylie as she got into the flow of the dance.
"Having fun?"
"Yes," Kylie replied and blinked. Is this supposed to happen?" With careless ease, John switched places with Kylie, never missing a beat. He let out a sigh before he smoothly guided his companion off the dance floor without wasting a beat. Free of the dancers, Johnathan strode forward, clearing his throat as he pushed past the gawking audience. Having received no response, Johnathan tapped the man on the shoulder.
"That's enough,"
Johnathan commanded.
"I said, that's enough."
Having stepped to his side, Kylie saw the brief transformation as it happened. Johnathan's skin grew pale, his eyes glowed red, and his voice filled with power as he spoke. Forced by the power in Johnathan's voice, the blood-lost Eternal finally pulled away from the blood doll he was draining at their feet.
"Fuck off,"
the Fanger hissed at Johnathan as he turned back to the body.
"No, you do not kill at a ball,"
Johnathan said, reaching forwards to grip the man's shoulder.
"Let him go." "What do you care? It's just an NPC,"
the Fanger growled again, attempting to push against Johnathan's hand and failing. He frowned as he pulled to his feet.
"Oh, God, you're one of those role-playing freaks." "Not exactly."
Johnathan smiled at him, tilting his head to the side.
"Now, be a good boy and go with these men."
Again, Kylie watched as a wave of power emanated from Johnathan. The Fanger growled, fighting it for a brief moment before he turned and followed the waiting security guards. Another pair of servers swooped in, taking hold of the body of the blood doll and removing it discreetly.
"What was that?"
Kylie murmured.
"Command,"
Johnathan explained as he guided her away.
"You've got that much power?"
Kylie said admiringly.
"Not exactly. I just have a lot more influence than he has,"
Johnathan said and waved his hand around.
"It's the game's version of a reputation monitor, but with in-game effects on other players. A high influence score adds weight to social skills and gifts."
Kylie frowned, biting her lip. Doesn't that take away from his will?
"Not really," Johnathan said. "He could ignore it if he really wanted to. However, doing so imposes a significant penalty on his own influence score. The game can nudge you, but it can't compel you."
Kylie nodded again, and Johnathan smiled, offering his hand again to hers.
"Now, where were we?"
Kylie shrugged, looking over the dance floor. The allure of the ball had fallen away after the encounter, and she looked at it once again with a critical eye. So, is this the game then? Snotty barbs, boardroom politics, and quasi-sex? At her pronouncement, Johnathan paused, quietly regarding her. Finally, he slowly nodded.
"For this portion, yes."
Okay. Kylie rubbed at her nose, thinking. Muttering to herself, she considered her options. I can work with that. Maybe play up the sex angle for the article.
"Well, we aren't done yet.
Since the boardroom politics doesn't interest you,
we'll move on."
Johnathan smiled, guiding her out of the building. He sighed regretfully, glancing back once as he brought Kylie to the exit. Oblivious to this, Kylie just continued to watch the players all around her. Where are we going now? Kylie said.
"Like all virtual games, combat is a major draw,"
Johnathan said, guiding her to the exit.
"There's an arena scheduled tonight, so I figured we might get you involved."
Combat? Kylie said, around the sudden lump in her throat. Once again, she had to remind herself that this was just a game. No matter how real it seemed, it was not real life.
"Yes,"
Johnathan replied. Magically, even as they exited, their car was waiting for them. Kylie blinked, staring at the vehicle. Well, she thought after a moment, it was a game. Altering minor things to make it more convenient for the players made sense. No one really wanted to wait for their car to pull up.
"Come, we'll need to change,"
Johnathan said as he entered after her and pulled a slim bag from under the chair. Kylie said, looking around the sparse interior.
"I won't look,"
Johnathan said, turning away to stare out of the window. Kylie blinked. Staring at the man before her, she sighed and reached for the bag. It was not as if Johnathan would actually see her real body, even if he did peek. The fact that she felt a slight thrill at the thought of Johnathan peeking was completely beside the fact, she told herself. Inside, Kylie was surprised to find some extremely sensible clothing choices. A sports bra and an athletic top were the underlayer, before a zip-up thin ballistic vest covered her torso. For her bottoms, Johnathan had packed double-lined Kevlar leggings and a pair of sturdy, if stylish, steel-toed boots. For weaponry, she found a pair of knives that attached to a separate belt. Kylie found herself pursing her lips in thought as she squirmed to undo the zipper in her back. Finally, giving up, she said, "John, I need your help with the zipper."
"Of course."
Johnathan turned to her, reaching for the zipper while Kylie pulled her hair aside. He deftly undid the zipper, his fingers brushing along her back as he pulled down. At his touch, Kylie drew in a soft breath, exhaling with regret when he released the dress and turned back to the window. Pushing it aside, Kylie squirmed in the back seat as she dressed, sliding on the clothing with deft movements. It was only when she was mostly dressed that she noticed that the window was just dark enough to have reflected most of what she was doing, if Johnathan had cared to look. Flushing, she opened her mouth to say something, but she was interrupted by Johnathan.
"Ready yet? We're nearly there."
Kylie nodded dumbly, and then realizing he was still looking away, she said, "Yes." Johnathan turned back, looking her up and down appraisingly. There was no heat in his eyes this time, just critical appreciation before he nodded. As the car drew to a halt, Johnathan stepped out and held out for her. "There's a jacket for you and me in the trunk. I'll need to dress too." When she opened the trunk, Kylie found the aforementioned articles of clothing, a matching pair of black leather jackets. A quick inspection revealed the correct jacket, which Kylie slipped on, hiding the pair of knives. As she came around the car, with Johnathan's jacket on her arm, her eyes widened. Johnathan had taken off his jacket and shirt and was in the process of arming himself with a pair of handguns. "How come I don't get a gun?" Kylie asked as Johnathan slid his jacket on. "Do you know how to shoot?" "Well, no. I didn't see the option of buying that skill either," Kylie added, and Johnathan nodded. "Guns are less useful against Eternals anyway. Better to use a knife. If you stick around, I'll make sure to give you a few lessons," Johnathan said, shutting the door of the car. The moment he did so, the car pulled away, and he led Kylie down the street. "We'll need to walk for a bit. It's not a good idea to arrive in a town car where we are going." "Where are we going?" Kylie grumped, feeling somewhat lost. "The Red Arms. Quinn's pub. He's the 𝗂𝗏𝗏 blood elder, and he's hosting the arena tonight. Should be pretty interesting." "Care to explain what an arena is?" "Oh, right," Johnathan said, looking abashed. "Think Roman gladiatorial arenas, except with Eternals, caught hunters, and other supernaturals." By this time, the pair had finally arrived at the pub. Unlike what she initially thought, the pub was actually a multi-story establishment that sprawled over the expanse of a block. Dark windows glittered, and a constant flow of people entered and exited the establishment. Johnathan did not approach the main exit, though, instead leading the pair around the building to a smaller, more discreet entrance. There, a hulking man watched and rejected casual passers-by, offering a single nod to the pair as they neared. Inside, the door opened onto a small landing for a set of staircases that led up and down. Johnathan guided Kylie downstairs without a word, the noise of the crowd beneath their feet resounding through the enclosed brick stairwell. Underneath, loud, bass-driven music thrummed, while a heaving press of bodies circled around bars and small tables. Stadium seating circled the inset, an underground, sanded arena where currently a pair of Eternals were fighting with rapiers. The flashing blades licked out, clashing and pulling back in a shower of glinting steel. Sharp blades entered bodies, leaving wounds that dribbled blood, which were ignored by the fighting pair. Outside of a few enthusiasts, the fighting was mostly ignored by the crowd. The attendees of the arena were a different breed than those at the ball. Leather, latex, and rubber seemed to be the most popular clothing choice, though flashes of plate and chainmail could be seen as well. While black continued to dominate the spectrum of color, other more unique and garish purples, pinks, and greens could be seen. It reminded Kylie of a mix between an S&M party and a midnight rave, both events that she had spent much of her youth at. Kylie could not help but find herself smiling slightly, eyes glinting at the heady atmosphere. This was something she could get her teeth into. Johnathan, watching her, shook his head ruefully. Well, it seemed that she would likely be re-rolling her character if she kept at this. "Johnathan!" Even over the throb of music, the roaring voice cut through the din. Kylie turned to see who it was, her eyes widening at the absolute beast of a man that came striding towards them. Topping even Johnathan's 6'3" by a foot, the ebony-skinned, shaven-haired man wore only a simple leather vest. "Quinn?" Johnathan greeted the man, sticking a hand out. It was grasped, and Johnathan was pulled into a back-slapping, single-armed hug by the muscular man. Johnathan was then pushed away from the black man, his body given a quick once-over. "Good. Very good. I was thinking this night was going to be a failure," Quinn said. "Quinn, this is Karen. I'm showing her around," Johnathan said, waving to Kylie. Kylie dropped a quick nod, deciding that a curtsy would be out of place here. "Huh, I heard. She looks to be enjoying herself," Quinn replied and then shook his head.
I need you to join the lineup. My headliner and my backup pulled out on me. Bloody cowards. No. Johnathan shook his head, holding a hand up. I'm showing a friend around, not taking part in your games. Excuses. Come on. It's an 𝗓𝗏𝗍𝗂. You know you want to. Quinn wheedled, gesturing towards the arena. You know none of these wimps are going to take it on.
What's an 𝗓𝗏𝗍𝗂? Kylie asked.
Boss of the pack for a group of werewolves. Bigger, stronger, and able to use their middle form. Very tough to beat.
Johnathan answered before glaring at Quinn.
And, are you insane? There's no way I'm fighting an alpha alone. Johnathan, I don't want to do this.
Quinn started.
Then don't. I'm calling in my favor. Fuck you, Quinn. I should never have made a deal with you.
Johnathan growled and rotated his shoulders.
An alpha. This is going to be a real pain, you know. Good man. Let me know if you need anything.
Quinn, having won his way, slapped Johnathan on the shoulder and left to inform the announcer of the change of plans.
Johnathan? Right. I have to do this. Sorry.
Johnathan said, his eyes fixed on the arena floor. His voice had grown more detached, colder as he settled into a fighting mindset. What is going on?
I owed him a favor. System registered and everything. If you refuse to fulfill a favor, you receive an Oathbreaker title that anyone can see. It makes it much more difficult for you to complete deals in the future. Only way to get rid of the title is to fulfill the favor. Have the person owed waive the title willingly, or time. A lot of time.
Are you going to be able to win? She asked, and Johnathan shrugged in answer. Lips thin, Kylie followed as Johnathan walked to the waiting rooms. She noted that he seemed to know his way around quite well, probably because he had done this before. The announcement of the change was clear and loud, and the music shut off for a few seconds while they answered. The roar of approval was so loud, Kylie blinked and tilted her head to stare at her friend. Exactly who was Johnathan in this world? He mixed with blood elders and knew the politics of the city, but he seemed to be well known among the arena fighters. More and more mysteries to be unraveled. She wanted to ask, but his fixed face as he waited warned her off. Time slipped by as the undercard fought on the small television screen. Kylie watched in fascination, torn between wanting to watch the fights in person and supporting her friend. After a time, Johnathan looked up and said, "Go." Needing no further encouragement, Kylie rushed out of the waiting room. It took her only a few minutes to find the exit, but outside, she realized that she had no clue where to go. The crowd around the arena was so packed, so excited, that she had no chance of getting closer. The crowd might have been enthusiastic before, but now they practically bounced in the air. Where to go now? Kylie muttered to herself, deciding finally on making a circuit. Perhaps she could find a seat. 2 full circuits later, Kylie had to admit that even the cheap seats were now filled. Disappointed, she moved to the back, closer to the bar. Unlike the ball, there were no liveried servants offering fresh sustenance. Here, the bars served chilled blood in bottles to the attendees.
Karen, isn't it?
The loud, gravelly voice behind her made her turn. She found herself smiling at the familiar face in relief. Yes.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were out here. Come, you can join me at my box.
Well,
it's the least I can do. I did take away your guide,
Quinn said, offering his hand. After a brief moment of hesitation, Kylie took it and let herself be led to the box. The box itself was small, though mostly empty. Grateful for the relative peace, Kylie sighed and seated herself. Beneath her, a green-skinned, long-eared, wiry creature fought with an Eternal, using a spear and shield. The Eternal wielded a whip, lashing the monster whenever it offered an opening. How did it get so busy?
Huh. The chance for a master to finally get his ass kicked? We're turning people away at the door. My betting floor is going nuts,
Quinn said as loudly as ever. But why?
He didn't tell you, did he? Let's just say your friend has made more than a few enemies. Of course, none of them have the guts to fight him themselves.
Can he win?
Hard to say. He's a tough son of a bitch,
Quinn said before he shrugged.
But it's an 𝗓𝗄 My main and backup are full parties. He's going to fight it alone. I wouldn't bet on it myself.
Kylie fell silent, staring out at the arena. The Eternal was pinned to the ground with a spear, his whip just out of his reach. Above him, his opponent was repeatedly slamming the edge of his shield into the Eternal's head until he finally stopped struggling. Letting loose a roar of triumph, the green-skinned monster strode around the arena, daring the handlers to come get him. What happens when you die?
You lose some blood potency and skills, and you are locked out until you resurrect eventually at your base, or a secondary base if your first is compromised. Most lockouts are a week long, but the older and more powerful your character is, the longer the lockout.
Kylie nodded again as the green-skinned monster was netted and dragged out for the next undercard. Lips pursed, she turned to Quinn. I want to join the fight.
With Johnathan?
Yes.
You don't stand a chance.
That's fine. I'm here to learn about the game, after all. Dying is part of the game.
You know what? It's fine. You should get to the waiting room then.
Kylie nodded quickly, standing up and then pausing. Seeing her confusion, Quinn called an attendant over to guide her to the waiting rooms, while he went to announce the change. Inside the waiting room, she found a sight that made her smile. Seated, cross-legged, was the large bruiser, meditating. Her entrance, though, alerted him immediately, and when he opened his eyes, Kylie found herself shivering, as the lizard hindbrain remembered what it is to be prey.
Kylie.
As quickly as it was there, the feeling faded as the intensity in his gaze subsided.
This is not a good time.
That's not a nice thing to say to your partner, Kylie said as she strode into the room, plopping down next to him.
What are you talking about?
I asked to join your fight. Johnathan frowned.
You've seen the arena?
Yes.
Good. There's not going to be a lot of space. When we enter, we should split up. I'll draw its attention immediately with my guns. Hopefully I can slow it down. When you find an opening, hit it. Attacks from the back and side work best. In its mid-form, you'll find the lichen has roughly the same body structure, though its ribs will be higher than you'd expect. So, wherever you'd hit a man, you'd hit a lichen. In wolf form,
Johnathan paused and shook his head.
Actually, don't worry about targeting when it's in wolf form. Just stab it.
You're not going to stop me?
Nope.
Silence filled the waiting room, punctuated only by the occasional roar of approval or disapproval from the crowd outside. In the end, Kylie gave in and asked, Why?
It's a game. It's not my place to tell you how you'll have the most fun,
Johnathan answered, and Kylie blinked, slowly nodding. Right. It was just a game. So why was she growing nervous? Kylie wiped her palms against her pants, marveling again at the realism of the game. After a time, with Johnathan back meditating, Kylie took her knives out from their sheath to play with them nervously. It was fascinating how the knife itself was discolored, silver and gray streaks interlacing the blade in a waterfall pattern. A few years ago, she had taken a self-defense course for an article she had to write for the school paper. They had briefly talked about and played with knives, and she cudgeled her brain for the half-remembered information. You held the blade like this, right? A knock on the door broke Kylie out of contemplation of her blades. Sliding them back into the sheaths after repositioning them to the sides, she looked over to Johnathan, who had stood smoothly from the floor. He offered her a single encouraging nod before walking to the door. Led by an attendant, the walk to the arena seemed to take forever. Kylie could hear the thud of her pulse in her ears, the smell of sweat, blood, and alcohol filling her lungs. Each step seemed to resound on the concrete floors, taking her closer to the fight. Once again, she reminded herself that this was just a game. Just a game. The roars when they entered the arena made her draw a startled breath.
The lights were so bright here. Looking around, she found her vision narrowing as she began to breathe faster. A hand caught hers, and she gasped, tugging on it as she scrambled for her knife in its sheath, only to realize that it was just Johnathan. "Easy there. Just focus on breathing," Johnathan said, his head bent low to whisper into her ear, "In, out, again." Kylie found herself following his instructions unconsciously, his hand squeezing the rhythm for her. As she calmed down, she found her vision opening up again, and she looked up, seeing the crowd again. Again, her breath caught before Johnathan tugged on her arm to bring her attention back to him. "Focus. Don't look up. Just down here. That's all there is. Got it?" Kylie nodded dumbly, and Johnathan flashed her a smile before he released her hand. "Draw your knives. It's about to begin." Grasping the knives, she fumbled them out and stared as Johnathan prowled to the other side. She marveled at how relaxed he seemed, as if none of this affected him. At the jerk of his head, she looked back to the other entrance, whose portcullis had begun to slowly rise. When it was a few feet off the ground, a four-legged monster of a wolf surged forward, jerked short by the chain held to its neck. Standing nearly 4 feet tall at its shoulders, the black and gray wolf snarled as it sought their lives. At a shouted command from above, the chain around the lichen's neck fell away. Beside her, Johnathan fired his guns, the staccato explosions assaulting her ears. Wounds blossomed across the lichen's body as the rounds impacted, throwing up bursts of blood that did little to stop the barreling monster. It charged straight for Johnathan, drawn to the older Eternal by his fire. The sudden eruption of violence held Kylie enthralled, the acrid smell of cordite filling her nostrils. As the lichen jumped towards Johnathan, her friend jumped and spun, lashing out a kick that caught the creature in midair, sending it spinning to the ground. The wolf crashed to the arena floor, unable to keep its footing before it began to shudder. Landing smoothly, Johnathan kept firing, pouring round after round into the monster. None of it seemed to affect the creature at all. Bullets began to pop out of its body as the body elongated and increased in bulk even further. A frustrated snarl filled the air as Johnathan dropped a gun and began reloading the other. As swiftly as he moved, the monster's transformation was quicker, and by the time he was ready to fire again, the creature was on its feet again, standing arms akimbo and roaring. Hoots and jeers filled the stadium even as Johnathan opened fire again, targeting the creature's face. The fight picked up pace even further as Johnathan glowed with an ethereal light and sped up to match the monster. What had been a blur before for Kylie became a series of snapshots, her own role forgotten. The pair began to run and dodge around the arena, Johnathan constantly firing and reloading his gun, while the larger monster charged the Eternal again and again. Each time, the man would escape from being cornered by the narrowest of margins, sidestepping, rolling, jumping, and even once sliding beneath the monster. Each attempt was not without cost, as the blood that began to dot the arena indicated. Twice they ran past Kylie, and on the second occurrence, a glancing blow by the monster sent her spinning into the arena wall. The blow ripped open her chest, cutting through armor, clothing, and flesh with ease, leaving her writhing in pain. When Kylie finally pulled herself straight, she found that Johnathan had finally run out of luck. A mistimed dodge had the monster pinning Johnathan to the wall, its second hand desperately caught in descent. Straining with both hands against the monster, the two were locked in stasis. Blood soaked both combatants, open wounds dripping red ambrosia to the ground. From her vantage point, Kylie could see the straining back muscles and the ragged breathing of the lichen. "Get up and help him, you stupid bent." The harsh words startled Kylie, the command forcing her to stand. As she realized that she was not a watcher, but a participant, she found herself running forward. What was it that Johnathan said? Hit it where it hurt? Ducking low, she swung underhanded, bringing the knife up between the monster's legs. She missed her initial target, having swung just a little early, and instead of castrating the monster, she managed to bury her knife between its buttocks. The monster screamed, surprised and shocked, as it was violated by the weapon. Released, Johnathan sprung back to his feet, and gripping the monster by its shoulders and body,
He ripped into its furry throat with his fangs. The monster struggled, lashing out with its hand and raking the man's body, while behind him, Kylie took the opportunity to repeatedly plunge the knife into its back. For a few moments more, the monster struggled. Before it collapsed to the ground, Johnathan clamped around its neck. Even as she watched, the wounds on Johnathan's back slowly closed, the ethereal glow slowly fading away. She blinked as Johnathan pushed away after a time, his mouth covered in blood, to gesture her forwards. "What? No," she said. "Drink. It's yours too," Johnathan urged her. Standing only a few feet away from the creature, she found the intoxicating scent of the blood overpowering. It smelled of steak and champagne and roses, of the best chocolate mousses and cookie dough. Kylie whimpered and found herself on her hands and knees, holding the monster's ruined head in her hands. Her resistance crumbled under the assault of her senses, and she buried her mouth in the fur and flesh, whimpering with pleasure as all those tastes and more rushed into her. She whimpered, her body growing wet as the waves of warm pleasure rushed down her throat. Unbeknownst to her, her own flesh began to glow as the potent blood knitted her body together. Finally satiated, Kylie looked up to see Johnathan smiling at her. She smiled back, blood dripping down her lips as her eyes glowed. She grinned, standing up and kissing him full on the lips, hungry for more as she molded her body to his. Her shirt torn, she pressed bare flesh against his and whispered, "Room, now." Johnathan grinned and quickly led her to the same entrance they had entered a short few minutes ago. Kylie found herself flushing further as the catcalls and roars of approval reached her ears, the crowd obviously understanding what was about to happen. In truth, it took all her willpower not to tear Johnathan's clothes off right there and then and mount him. Inside the room, she grabbed the larger man and threw him against the bench, straddling him as she ripped the tattered remains of her vest and top off. Johnathan's hands reached up, cupping her breast as they spilled free, before he ran his thumbs across her hard nipples. The movement sent an electric jolt down Kylie's spine, making her arch her spine. She panted out loud as he then lowered his mouth over her nipple, the warm, wet sensation of his tongue sliding along her skin, making her grind on top of him. Too turned on for slow play, Kylie pushed his head away from her body as she fumbled at his trousers, pulling them down to reveal Johnathan's long, hard prick. Absently, she noted that he was uncircumcised before she plunged her head downwards. His heady, sweaty musk filled her nose and mixed with the ever-present smell of blood, making her even wetter as she began to bob on his cock. She tasted him on her tongue as she used her lips to push back his hood before sliding her tongue against the sensitive head. Sucking on the cock, Kylie thought to try something new. How long could she keep this pressure up? After all, an eternal required significantly less oxygen than a human. Smirking to herself, she kept the pressure on, looking up to meet Johnathan's eyes. He was watching her, mouth open slightly, eyes slightly unfocused as she continued to bob. As she brought his head to her lips again and swirled her tongue around it, a stifled moan escaped his lips. As if the noise was her starting gun, Kylie let the cock go and quickly stripped her pants down, hooking her fingers around the thong to slide them down at the same time as her pants. A part of her noted that the thong was so much more comfortable to wear in-game than in real life, before she dismissed the thought and straddled his powerful legs. Expertly guiding him into her, she whimpered slightly as the head pushed apart her lips and slipped inside. Johnathan arched his back, desperate to push deeper, but Kylie rose with him, silky skin on his shirt. He grunted as she pushed him down again and ripped his shirt off completely, running a nail sharply down his chest. Muscles glistened as she left a red line along his skin before she finally let herself down fully, sliding all the way in. Relaxing into the feeling of being filled completely, Kylie rocked her hips back and forth on his as her fangs extended, plunging into his neck. The taste of his blood made her pussy clench, her arms locked around his. She groaned around the bite, his blood tasting even better than the lichens. Waves of pleasure rocked up from her pussy to her head and then down again, each wave building on the other, in an explosion that had her body clenching tight. For what seemed to be minutes, she swam in the pleasure before she found herself conscious of her own body again.
Wow.
Yeah, Johnathan grinned and kissed her before he murmured,
and we're only just getting started.
Hours later, Kylie finally pulled the VR helmet off her head. She breathed in and then exhaled raggedly, realizing that not everything stayed in the game. Between eternal stamina, adjusted physics, and an abandonment that came with knowing that it was all virtual, the last few hours had been wild. Lazily running a finger down her body, she smiled at the memories. Well, perhaps the virtual world had its own charms. This has been First Steps into the Night, written by 𝗬𝗏, narrated by Stephanie Nemeth Parker. Copyright 2021 by 𝗬𝗏. Production copyright 2021 by 𝗬𝗏.